Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. As you can see, I have with me Mr. Sanjay Dixit from the Jaipur Dialogue. Sir, thank you so much for joining me once again on Dev Talks and to talk about a very interesting and very relevant and valid subject in today's day and age, especially given the events that have happened in the United Kingdom.
Namaste to
Decolonization.
you and to all your viewers. Good to
As
be
I
here
was
once
saying, sir,
again.
thank you, sir. Decolonization of Indian strategic thinking. थोड़ा भारी सब्जेक्ट है सर थैंक यू आई मीन फॉर टेकिंग इट अप
Yes, it sounds quite good. And where to begin, actually?
I want to start with
Decolonization
one
of
thing, sir.
India.
First and foremost, we in India have gotten used to a certain thought process already. Everything is kind of the way it is. How do you identify the colonization part of it? So that's the first thing. Let's begin with the identification of it.
See, the colonization of the Indian strategic thinking is actually best reflected in Jawaharlal Nehru, who was completely bereft of any strategic thinking. Why? Because he thought that everything for him would be thought out by his friend Lord Mountbatten and his British colonizers, and he put too much faith in the Commonwealth and the common good and internationalism. It is best illustrated by that particular anecdote, which I have quoted in my book, and which is supposed to have been written by General Manekshaw, and how the airlift to Srinagar began in 1947, and how that instrument of accession was signed, how he had gone with VP Menon to Srinagar, came back, and then with General Roy Bucker, uh, he sat in that fateful meeting where Jawaharlal Nehru was talking about everything else except Srinagar, and then Sardar Patel butted in and said, Jawahar, do you want Kashmir or not? And then he said, of course I want. And then he was cut short by by Sardar Patel, and he told General Bakr, "Mm, that's your order, now go." So that is the colonized mind. The colonization, of course, is a physical reality that happens on the ground. But the colonized mind is something that persists for a very, very long time. And the theory of that colonized mind, of course, what we call now these days, it's become fashionable to call it coloniality. So, coloniality, colonization, colonized minds, these are all three dimensions of the same phenomenon.
So you've given an example of a thought process that probably would have lingered and is still lingering within the strategic community of India, because we see that the pride of being an Indian has suddenly just come in. It's not something that was there before, and it's not fully there yet as well. If somebody says that we are all there right now, no, it's not. I wanted to ask you, sir, this mindset that we've got of being inferior than the rest of the world, or especially than the Europeans and the Americans and stuff like that. How do you set up the reasons for something like this, sir?
That comes from, again, I would lay the blame right on the door of Mr. M.K. Gandhi. It was because of his inferiority complex that he chose a person who the British wanted. He wasn't somebody who the Congress party wanted or who the people of India wanted. The Britishers wanted that they should leave India in the hands of a familiar person with whom they could do business with, or who spoke their language, who understood their manners, who understood their concerns, and they thought Nehru was the only man in the pack. And accordingly, they put in a word to M.K. Gandhi who actually, like a dictator, foisted him on the Indian National Congress. Now we have all the papers, everything is out in the open, and we know that Jawaharlal Nehru was not sponsored by or nominated by a single Pradesh Congress committee. According to the rules that were there at that time, nomination could only be done by a Pradesh Congress committee. He did not have a single nomination, and still Gandhi foisted him. He made Sardar Patel withdraw. And sometimes I hold it against Sardar Patel also. If you are a true Democrat, then why should you actually succumb to the diktats of a person who you yourself know that has gone half senile? Because Sardar Patel was the only one who went and agitated against his brahmacharya experiments. Rather, he was the only one who actually told him off that uh,
Yeah.
Bapu, what you're doing is not quite correct. And he was doing it with his own grandniece. So that was even worse. So that is the first sign of inferiority. That inferiority comes from M.K. Gandhi, because M.K. Gandhi, I've always suspected that he wore that garb of a Mahatma in order to hide that deep inferiority complex that he always had vis-a-vis the British. Now it is again on record. So many people have said it. The British parliamentarians have said it. I forget the name of that good lady who said it, that he was the best policeman that we had in India. Every time we had trouble, he actually came to protect us. And with that sense of deep inferiority, his parting gift to India was Jawaharlal Nehru. And Jawaharlal Nehru was so deeply colonized, he was colonized by every Western idea, he was colonized by communism, he was colonized by Fabians, he was colonized by English mannerisms. So there you had it. And you had him prime minister for 46. He became then what is called the vice chairman of the Viceroy's Council, which was effectively the prime minister, and continued till 1964, 18 years in the formative stage. And he set the tone. He set the tone to such an extent, the extent of physical colonization was such that till 1956 you had a British Air Force chief, and till 58, till 56 you had a British naval chief, and
Maybe.
till 58 you had a British Air Force chief. I'm not sure if it is vice versa, but 56 and 58 I distinctly remember. So the two of your chiefs were there till 56 and 58.
Mhm.
And had it not been for the Hyderabad police action, in which Sardar Patel appears to have told off uh, General Sir Roy Bucker to buzz off, that probably the Indian military, the army chief would also have been British. And Roy Bucker put in his papers and went off. And that is how Indians got their first uh, Indian army chief. Army chief who was Indian, rather than, let's put it this way. So the roots are there for everybody to see. They have imbibed the our main leader and the folks whom he nurtured. Plus, he also raised a very good crop of Islamists along with. Uh, they imbibed that coloniality that looks down on the Indian civilization, thinks that everything that India had was all crap, and the only good that India got was through the period of British colonization. When you have this kind of thinking, and then you also are charmed by the idea of the communists, when you admire Soviet Union and its model, and then yeah, actually 1955, 56, that's exactly what they did. And in the AICC meeting at Aadi, that is where they adopted the socialistic model, and that is the time that the Congress split. And all those who opposed that socialist oblique communist model left the Congress, and that included stalwarts like Purushottam Das Tandon,
Mhm.
Rajaji, Acharya Kripalani. So all the thinking people which Congress had, actually left Congress in 1956. And that mental colonization, that thought process, that continued. Then, of course, after a brief interregnum, you had Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter come in, who actually outsourced education uh, to the communists. So the communists very gleefully took that opportunity, continued with it. And Indian Army actually, I think, was fortunate that it got a drubbing in 1962. It's an unconventional thing to say.
Mm, mm,
Had it not got a drubbing in 1962, it would not have survived 65 and 71. We would have lost Kashmir. It was because of that drubbing in 1962 that certain hard decisions had to be taken willy nilly, and that those are the kind of things that brought capable generals like Sam Manekshaw to the fore. In fact, you remember, and Manekshaw recovered Nefa after the Chinese started withdrawing, and he completely recovered Nefa. It was actually opposed by Pandit Nehru.
mm.
These are the things on record. And he said, I will do what I have been sent to do. You don't want me, remove me. But in the wake of the debacle, Nehru did not have the spine to take that kind of a decision. In fact, Nehru was also, you remember, what's his name, Mr. Daulatram, who actually sent the mission to Tawang and
Taban.
got Tawang for India. Even he was scolded very badly by Pandit Nehru. So Pandit Nehru, to left to him, he would have given away Kashmir, he would have given away everything. We know that I think in 1963 that dialogue took place between Bhutto and that delegation led by I think Swaran Singh, in which Bhutto demanded the whole of J&K except very gratuitously. He just left Kathua for India. That is something that is recorded in the memoirs of Dr. Karan Singh also. And otherwise, also it is there in the papers. So, but such a deep sense of inferiority they continued, and primarily due to M.K. Gandhi. M.K. Gandhi uh, had this sense of inferiority first against the Muslims. That is how he went and went head over heels to support them during the Khilafat movement. And after supporting them, the Khilafat movement, when they kicked him on his backside, even then he continued to grow well before them.
Mm.
Uh, I think it's singularly the misfortune of Indians that I'm quite sure that if we had better communication those times, and had there been something like an internet, I think the people would have made Gandhi to resign from the Congress. Can you imagine that kind of a thing happening today and public not reacting?
Oh no. Oh no.
Just imagine if
Eh,
Modi ji does that kind of a thing. Something, his sins of omission,
mhm.
his Modi ji's sins of omission uh, make people roast him so badly that he has to actually pacify the public opinion from time to time.
Correct.
People accuse him of not acting. And there was a person in 1920s, in the 1930s, acting actively against Indian interests, saving the British every time they came under pressure, actually vilifying the armed resistance of our youth, secretly conspiring to get people like Bhagat Singh hanged. Uh, I think, and yet some people say that he should be called father of nation. That's, I think, the ultimate mental colonization. And that's what gets reflected in our strategic thinking. I think that is the root.
I indeed, sir. As a matter of fact, and you know what you're saying about 62 has a lot of precedence in 1956 when the road that the Chinese were making was in under construction. A lot of people might not know the Chinese actually wanted to pay tax to India, and they said that we can make this road, we'll pay you tax, so just let's work together. And we said no, and then they said, okay, since you've not come there, we'll just make the road. You know? So there are loads of such things which are there, and it's amazing that these things are coming out today, sir. And that's one thing again I want to ask you. One, how has this affected India over the years? Because it was the first 20 years that kind of stuck us into that mental block, and then after that, time went by. We got, as you said, the routing of 1962. 65 we went through, 71 we went through. So it was not that they were not threats and they were not issues with it.
72, I think, was worse than 62. And 72,
Similar.
we didn't even feel that it was a defeat, something that we had won in 1971. We lost that, and we lost considerable strategic advantage in 1972 through the Shimla Agreement. And that was something that was done by Indira Gandhi so unilaterally that the armed forces were not involved in it at all.
Yeah.
And it was just she and some of her henchmen who got charmed, I'm told, by Benazir Bhutto. I don't know why Indira Gandhi should have got charmed by Benazir Bhutto, or somebody else got charmed, maybe. Who charmed whom? Whatever. But that kind of one sided agreement, I think that again speaks very poorly of our strategic thinking.
Absolutely. So going forward, that is one big thing. I mean, we lost a war that we won. Uh, in the current, let's say after the 2000s, what is, because that's the time one would say, okay, fair enough, India started growing and stuff like that. Where do you think that India has actually lost big time in terms of opportunity and things like that because of this mindset that we've got? And secondly, how is this now, is it being identified firstly? I mean, let me just put that across first.
I think there are two hark backs which result from this mental colonization. And one of them is that, actually, not two, but three. And that's with regard to our neighbors.
Hmm.
And two of them with regard to Pakistan, and one with regard to China. And there is a common thread running through all three. And that common thread that runs through all three is that we think that we can appease our neighbors into being friendly with us. Now,
Hmm.
where that thinking comes from, maybe that comes from what is called a transgenerational transmission that occurred due to the Islamic and the British imperialism. The two things that stand out with regard to Pakistan are that, number one, we regard Pakistan as a normal nation, which it is not. Because of its very history, it is not. In what manner do we regard it as normal nation? Is it a normal nation state?
No.
Look at its history. Look at the plank on which partition was demanded. It never called itself a nation state. It called itself part of the Islamic Ummah. And therefore, after it became a recognized country, as recognized by the United Nations, you should have looked at it, you should have looked at the history, and then regarded it as an abnormal nation and differentiated between the nation and the state. So it may be a strong state, it is held by a military, but it is definitely not a normal nation. And because it is a normal nation, the second corollary, the corollary is that India has always regarded, it's one of its diplomatic pronouncements, is that it thinks that a stable Pakistan is in its interest. Now, how is a stable Pakistan in its interest? That is a complete, I think, a colonized mindset. Also distorted by the communists, and even our military planners have been fed this what is called these secular tropes so much that they do not even study the basics of Pakistan. Because I have asked many people, and Pakistan has put its military doctrine in the open, and it is the Quranic concept of war by Brigadier S.K. Malik, a foreword of which was written by Ziaul Haq himself. And we do not teach it in our academies. I'm told it's only now, I think, somewhere one of the institutes, it
Yeah.
has now been uh, brought in. But we don't teach it in the NDA, we don't teach in the IMA, we uh, don't teach it in the Wellington Staff College. So these three premier institutes, you still hold that artificial secularist candle burning, when clearly you have to study the enemy from the lens that he views himself from. So that again, I think, a completely colonized state of mind that is affecting our strategic thinking vis-a-vis Pakistan. Only now I find Dr. S. Jaishankar. Uh, I think he must have got it from his father. Maybe his father was also was a great strategic thinker, Mr. Subramaniam. It's only now that he has started articulating it a little bit, and he also started pushing back in the other form of coloniality, that is uh, the Western hubris, that the Western assumption, or rather Western dogma,
Assumption. Mm.
that thinks that it is its right to preach to India, and that it is its right to expect India to serve its interests. Even this was not being pushed back sufficiently strongly, I should say, until 3 years back.
Mhm.
It is only now, after
Yeah.
Dr. Jaishankar has come in, that they started at least articulating about it. And after the Ukraine war, this has come more into picture,
Prominence. Mm.
more into prominence. So these are the two things that, with regard to Pakistan, I also mentioned uh, the Western expectations and our service to the Western expectation. The next is about China. With China, this strange unwillingness to push back on Tibet, when China is pushing us all the way into our own territory in Eastern Ladakh, into our own territory in Arunachal. That also I find very strange. That China might have agreed to recognize your boundaries in Sikkim in exchange of your recognizing Tibet. But
Mhm.
is China honoring even the Sikkim boundary? It isn't. So why are we honoring our premise on Tibet when we know that they are so sensitive that you only have to utter the Tibet word? That's all. You remember, Sushma Swaraj once said that uh, if you expect us to honor one China, then you have to honor one India
One
too.
India. Mhm.
I think the corollary to that is that if you expect us to tolerate your nonsense in Eastern Ladakh and Arunachal, then we will at least start talking about Tibet, and we will de-recognize your sovereignty on Tibet. I think we will get very strong US support on that.
Hmm.
That's what my thinking is, because that will support. That is one strategic nuance that will support the United States and the West against China much more than any physical activity or any naval activity that you can carry out, or anything else that you might do physically. So I think these things, they stand out, and the main reason, the main hesitation that I think that comes from that inferiority complex that you talked about.
Mm.
And I think our youth has slowly grown out of that inferiority over the last 20 years, because they can see that we can compete with the West all over the world. They can see that the world business space is dominated by our people. The third richest person is from India, and the top 100 has got so many Indians there. All these things, they bolster our self-confidence, at least the self-confidence of our youth, our educated class. But I doubt the self-confidence of our leaders, most of our leaders. You can leave aside a few, including the Prime Minister, uh, who does act fairly self-confidently in the international space. But what about the others? I mean, that's the reason that he has had to bring Mr. Jayashankar into it.
Hmm.
I think a large number of our political leaders, especially in the opposition space, they still think that they have to kowtow to the West, and it is their duty to do the bidding of the West to be able to hold their own. So that part of that mental colonization still persists in the political space. It also persists in significant aspects of our soft power, such as Bollywood. Bollywood thinks that it can only copy,
Mm.
and now the public has started pushing back.
Yeah.
The public started telling them, "The good, uh, you can go to hell. We are not going to uh, watch the nonsense that you put out. After all, if we have to watch the what is called the visual effects, then we'll watch Hollywood. Why will we watch you? Contents, in any case, you're not giving anything. Even the contents you're copying. There's nothing Indian in it. And most of the time, you're denigrating the local culture." So that actually shows the
Pushback.
public becoming confident, the public junking this Western colonialism, the public taking pride in the Bharatiyata,
Mm.
the uh, ancient Indian culture. But the political space and the establishment at large, and to a good extent, our military planners, I think they're still in the grip of that.
Agree and understand. As a matter of fact, you've mentioned certain things which are very relevant in today's day and age. It's current examples, if I may, sir. But one thing that I have an observation, and I don't know if you'd agree with me, strategic thinking, as per se, is a larger picture sort of a thinking. And with the way that we see people trying to trend certain incidents, I mean, in the military, it's about tactics, which is a small, sort of a sector, and there is strategic, which is a larger picture. We in India normally try and concentrate on that tactical aspect of situations. And we've not been able to evolve ourselves out of looking at the bigger picture or waiting for developments to kind of happen. Is this also a mindset? Because this is also controlled by a huge amount of press inflow that comes from the West, and a lot of us are scared that why are people writing bad about us? How do you picturize this in regard to all the change that is taking place in India, sir?
You've got a point there, because most of our elite, what we call elite, the elites still consume all their news from the West.
Yeah.
So I think with greater democratization of the media space, the elites are becoming less and less relevant. So that is quite heartening. And most of the time, people are not listening to them. Good example, of course, you can be seen that people like you and me, we get a lot of positive feedback. So that shows that the traditional media tropes are not working, and that also shows, at least in the visual media space, that a lot of channels you will find, the traditional news channels, they are actually, you can see over a period of last 3 4 5 years, that they are also sensing the change and accordingly trimming their sales.
There's indeed that entire thing, sir. But now, you mentioned channels. I mean, yourself, you've been doing a lot to bring about the Indian history, which obviously, uh, I mean, when people only know the story that you've told us about the independence part of it, can only people actually try and comprehend and read further about what happened and what is the impact of something like that. Now, I want to dwell upon this a little further, sir. The independent media today in the country, for example, people like Anuj Dhar, today a lot of people might know him because of the fact that he's been able to come out into alternate media channels like yourself and talk about various issues that probably were shunned, probably were not supposed to be spoken about. People didn't think that was the right way of doing things. How do you think this particular thing is going to take us forward in terms of changing the way we think?
It is definitely changing. If you look at, you mentioned Anuj Dhar, and you can see where his campaign led to.
Yeah.
If you find Netaji's statue on the Kartavya Path today, you find Rajpath changed to Kartavya Path, then I think you and me can take a little bit of credit. Yes, we have made a difference. Otherwise, had the old situation continued, the old media would not even have picked it up. I've seen a lot of things these days. The trend is that things start trending on the social media first. The the people on the news channels are looking at the videos of YouTubers, which are the videos getting reactions, and accordingly they are deciding the stories to do for the day.
Yeah.
I've seen that so many times, that we pick up something and the media wakes up to it the next day, and then we get invited to the channels because we've just done that story a day earlier, and it has done 1 lakh views or 2 lakh views. So a lot of media is now learn to play catch up, and that is a good thing. That is actually democratization of the media space, as I just said.
Indeed, sir, this is a very telling interview. And my last question to you, sir, about just a small comment about where do you see us in the next 3 to 5 years with regards to our thought process and trying to, a lot of people, let me rephrase, a lot of people don't understand what national interest actually stands for. Uh, how do you see this particular concept going into the stream of India, where we sometimes need to take decisions for the national interest of the country, which may not be very popular, but one has to do it? How do you think this
Well,
aspect of it going forward?
national interest is a very hard-nosed concept, and that's
Yeah.
something that you have to take out of the lexicon of Chanakya. You can't do it in the form of these abstract notions of becoming a Vishwaguru or saying Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam or Ahimsa Paramo Dharma uh, and whatnot. In fact, this had got so vicious that ultimately I had to do a series in which I actually had to teach people that these concepts of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam or Ahimsa Paramo Dharma, Sarva Dharma Sambhav or Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vadanti, they belong to the Adhyatmic space. And in the Indian literature itself, whenever people have tried to implement it in the practical space, the literature has actually spoofed them. And I brought out that particular story from the Hitopadesh, which has made fun of somebody trying to implement Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in the material space, because that concept belongs to the spiritual space.
Other
It
level.
doesn't
Yeah.
belong to the material space. So these abstractions have also, that either you are just following the lead given to you by the West, or you're talking in abstractions. So the contribution that people like us have made is to focus on reality, to focus on pragmatism, and to actually tell people that our aphorisms, our mahavakyas, our stories have to be treated in a context. Remember, in India, there is not one literature written. There is not one itihas, there is not one Puran, and there is not one Ved or Vedic Richa which is without a context. It has a context, always.
Yeah.
It is not like Abrahamic religions where text itself is supreme. In India, you cannot have a text without a context.
Context.
So this is something that we managed to drill into people. The people are now beginning to understand. I now start getting feedback even from military veterans and current military professionals. So I think things are filtering down.
Cheers to you, sir. That's all I would say. And thank you so much for taking our time to explain the whole concept of colonialization of the mind. Because no matter how much growth we get, and if we just still are where we were in 1947 in our minds, there is nothing we can do. The economy can keep going up, but one thing that, as a closing, I'd like to say, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, smaller nations with more nationalistic and more proud feelings, without anything, can still stand up to anybody they want to or do whatever they want to, considering the factor that they have their heads together and in their control. So that's, I think, what I take from you. And it's important that as Indians we need to get our thought process built from India, derived from India, and as you said, with context of a certain situation or whatever it is. Thank you so much for joining me once again, and it's always a pleasure listening to you on your show, the Jaipur Dialogues, and of course a pleasure to have you on Dev Talks as well, sir.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Namaste.